The morning sky above the Cunner Valley was still dark when Staff Sergeant Mara Calloway checked her rifle for the last time. She ran her fingers along the cold metal of the barrel, tightened the scope with a small turn, and slung the weapon across her back. She had done this exact same check hundreds of times before. It was not a nervous habit. It was simply the way she prepared herself, quietly, carefully, without rushing. She was 27 years old. She had grown up in Missoula, Montana, where winter came early and stayed long. Her father had taught her to track elk through fresh snow when she was 9 years old. He had taught her to be patient, to read what she saw, and to trust her hands more than her fear. Those were not lessons she had learned in a classroom. They were lessons she had lived. She joined the Army at 19. Not because she had something to prove, and not because she had no other options. She joined because she was good at exactly the kind of thinking the military needed: calm, focused, practical. She did not waste energy on what she could not control. She put all of it toward what she could. By the time she arrived at Fort Benning for advanced marksmanship training, her instructors already knew her name before she introduced herself. She broke 3 range records in her first week. She never talked about it afterward. Now she was in Afghanistan, assigned to a 9-person team operating in one of the most difficult regions in the country. The team included 6 American soldiers and 3 Afghan National Army soldiers. Their mission that morning was a simple link-up. They were walking 5 kilometers east to meet a village elder who had information to share. On paper, it was a low-risk assignment. Everyone on the team understood that paper did not always match the ground. They moved out at 5 in the morning, walking single file along the northern ridge above the valley. The air was cold and dry. The only sounds were boots on loose rock and the quiet hiss of wind moving through the ravine below. Calloway walked third in the column. She watched the slopes above them and the open ground to the south. Something about the valley felt heavier than it should have. She could not explain it exactly. She just felt it. At 41 minutes past 5, the first shot came from the southern slope. It was a single round, not aimed at anyone directly, just a signal. A few seconds later, 2 more followed. Then the entire ridge lit up. The sound was sudden and overwhelming, like a wall of noise falling from every direction at once. The team dropped into the irrigation canal that ran beside the path, a narrow concrete channel barely wide enough for a soldier carrying full equipment. It was not comfortable. It was not safe. But it was the only cover they had, and they took it instantly, because hesitation was the one thing none of them could afford. Calloway pressed herself against the northern lip of the canal and brought her rifle up. She scanned the slopes quickly and methodically. The fire was coming from 3 different elevations at the same time, a classic ambush pattern designed to confuse, to scatter, and to pin a small team in place while a secondary group closed in from the side. She identified the biggest threat within a few seconds. There was a machine gun position set up inside a ruined stone wall approximately 380 meters to the south. The gunner had a wide field of fire and was already directing rounds across the canal with frightening accuracy. As long as that position stayed active, her team could not move. Calloway exhaled slowly. She settled the crosshairs. She controlled her breathing the way her father had taught her, not by holding it, but by finding the natural pause between breaths. She pressed the trigger. The shot left the barrel. The bolt cycled back. Then it stopped. There was a sound she had never heard before from this rifle, a short, grinding metal-on-metal resistance, like gears catching where there should be none. The bolt carrier locked in a position it should never reach. The rifle would not cycle. It would not fire again. The machine gun was still active. Her team was still pinned. And her rifle was dead. Sergeant First Class Douglas Hennessy, lying 30 meters to her left, shouted her call sign twice. He needed that southern position suppressed. He needed it now. She could hear the urgency in his voice, but she did not answer yet, because answering without a solution was useless. She took 3 seconds to assess everything she knew. The problem was a separated case. The front portion of the cartridge casing had remained lodged inside the chamber after the shot. It was one of the worst malfunctions a marksman could face in the field, because clearing it required a tool she did not have with her. Without a cleaning rod to push the stuck piece out from the muzzle, it had to be done by hand, which was slower, harder, and far less certain. She also knew something else. Before the ambush had started, she had tracked a secondary group of fighters moving along the southern ridgeline. They were a flanking element. Their job was to loop around while the main ambush held the team down and then close in from the east. She estimated they had approximately 90 seconds before that flanking group reached a position where the canal would no longer protect her team's right side. 90 seconds. She did not waste any of them. She rolled onto her back, rifle across her chest, working by feel because her eyes needed to stay on the southern slope whenever her neck allowed. Her left hand found the bolt release. Her right controlled the receiver. She breathed in short, measured intervals, not to calm herself, exactly, but to keep her hands from tightening beyond what the work required. She reached into her kit and pulled out her folding knife, a Benchmade she had carried for 4 years. She did not open the blade. She used the spine, the flat back edge, and pressed it into the extractor, pushing at the brass ring lodged in the chamber. The canal wall behind her became her working surface. She tapped the back of the knife handle with her palm once. The brass piece shifted slightly but did not clear. She adjusted her angle by a few degrees and tapped again. Concrete dust fell from the lip above her. Her knuckles scraped against the rough channel wall and began to bleed. She did not register it as pain, not yet. Her entire attention was in the few centimeters between the extractor and the chamber opening. The machine gun continued firing in long, controlled bursts. She could hear the rounds cracking overhead, close enough that she felt the air change each time. At 47 seconds into the malfunction, a burst from the machine gun raked the top of the canal lip just above her position. A fragment, she never learned whether it was a piece of the bullet jacket or a chip of concrete, opened a clean 2-inch cut across her left forearm. She felt the sharp heat of it immediately. She looked at it for exactly 1 second. The cut was bleeding, but her arm still worked. Her grip was still functional. She went back to work. She repositioned the knife spine and tapped a third time, using slightly more force, with the angle adjusted to pull rather than push against the extractor. The brass ring moved. She tapped once more. It cleared, spinning out of the receiver and landing somewhere in the concrete channel beside her. She performed a function check with one hand, bolt forward, carrier moving freely, chamber empty and clean. It was good. She rolled back to prone in a single motion, positioned her body behind the rifle, and chambered a fresh round from the magazine. She found the ruined stone wall in her scope. The machine gun was still up. The flanking element, by her internal count, was somewhere between 30 and 45 seconds from the team's eastern flank. She found her natural pause between breaths. She pressed the trigger. The round traveled 380 meters in less time than it takes to blink. The machine gun went silent. The next 6 minutes were controlled and loud and exhausting. With the southern suppression lane restored, the 2 light machine gunners on the team were able to redirect their fire toward the flanking element before it could reach a decisive position. The enemy group, now without the support of the crew-served weapon, could not sustain its push. They began to fall back. By 6 in the morning, all incoming fire had stopped. The valley went quiet again, though it was a different kind of quiet than before, heavier, with the smell of smoke in it. The team's medic, Sergeant First Class James Arrieta, moved down the canal checking on everyone. When he reached Callaway, she was already reloading and scanning the southern slope. He noticed her forearm when he saw the color on her grip tape. "When did this happen?" he asked. "About the halfway point," she said, meaning halfway through the malfunction. He cleaned the cut and closed it with 11 stitches, working quickly and without much conversation, which was how both of them preferred to operate. She did not receive a painkiller. She said she did not need one. He did not argue, because he had learned that Callaway's self-assessments were generally accurate. No one on the team was lost that morning. 2 soldiers were wounded, Callaway, and Specialist Travis Cole, who had taken a round through his left thigh approximately 2 minutes into the contact and had continued firing for the remainder of the engagement without reporting it until the fight was over. When Arrieta asked Cole why he had not said anything, Cole looked at him and said simply that he had still been able to shoot. That was the culture of the team. Not recklessness, there was nothing reckless about what either of them had done. It was a deep, practical understanding that stopping was a decision, and that stopping had consequences for the people beside them. They each made the calculation and chose to stay in it. At the forward operating base later that day, Calloway sat through a debrief and described the malfunction in exact terms. She identified the cause, the steps she took, the time it required, and the effect on her ability to engage the target. She used no dramatic language. She did not describe the fear she may or may not have felt. She described the problem and the solution, which was what the debrief required, and which was also, in its own way, exactly who she was. Her team leader, Captain Andre Whitmore, submitted a commendation on her behalf shortly after. The citation noted her ability to clear a critical malfunction under direct fire and restore suppressive capability at a moment when the team's position was at significant risk. It noted the wound she sustained during the process and the fact that she re-engaged the target within moments of clearing the jam. The Army awarded her the Commendation Medal with the Valor device attached, a small bronze letter V that indicated the action had occurred in direct contact with the enemy. She accepted it without ceremony. She put it in her kit bag with the rest of her things. What the official citation could not fully capture, and what those who were in the canal that morning understood without needing to say it, was the specific quality of thinking that Calloway had demonstrated. It was not bravery in the dramatic, cinematic sense. It was something quieter and more difficult. It was the ability to look at a situation that had gone completely wrong, at the worst possible moment, and refuse to let it expand beyond what it actually was. A rifle had jammed. That was a problem. Problems had solutions. She had 90 seconds. She used every one of them. There is a kind of person who, when something breaks in the middle of a crisis, freezes, not out of weakness, but because the mind, suddenly overwhelmed, begins calculating all the ways things can continue to go wrong instead of the one way they can go right. Most people have experienced this in smaller ways. A phone stops working during an important call. A car stalls in an intersection. The words disappear mid-sentence during a presentation. The brain stutters. Time feels strange. Calloway did not do that. She never had. Her father, when she was 12, had once asked her what she did when she felt afraid during a difficult shot. She had thought about it for a moment and then told him that she did not think about being afraid, because thinking about being afraid used up the same space in her mind that she needed for the shot itself. He had nodded and said nothing, because that was exactly right, and he had no useful thing to add to it. She left the Army in 2014, after a decade of service. She returned to Montana. She worked for a time as a hunting guide in the mountains north of Missoula, a job that suited her precisely, in the way that certain jobs suit certain people so completely it seems as though they were designed for each other. She was patient with clients who were nervous, clear with those who were inexperienced, and quietly demanding of everyone in the way that good guides are. She taught people to read wind, to hold still, to wait. She rarely talked about the valley. Not because she was hiding from it, and not because she was diminished by it. She did not talk about it for the same reason she had never talked about her marksmanship records at Fort Benning. It was part of her record. It had happened. She had done what needed to be done. The story, in her mind, ended there. The men who had been in the canal with her that morning did not see it the same way. They talked about it, not often, but sometimes, late in the evening, when conversations turned toward the times things had come close to going badly. They would mention the canal, and the machine gun, and the silence that followed her shot. And someone would always say what Douglas Hennessy had said first, in the debrief room at the base, when the captain asked if there was anything additional anyone wished to add to the record. Hennessy had paused for a moment, looking at the table. She was bleeding, he said quietly, and she still put it down. The room had been still after that. No one felt the need to add anything else.